I owe Patrick a lot in that he believed in me and perhaps still does believe in me more than I believe in myself. He recognized something in me and he trusted me with telling the story in this way, pushed me to places that I hadn't been before as an actor. And, you know, I'm definitely a better actor now than I was when I started the job.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Himesh Patel is an actor. He sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work. When you first land a new role, and you know now, okay, this is my job now. I have to bring this character to life in the best of my ability. This is my job. Do you have a typical first step that you take toward that goal?
Yeah, I think it's sort of checking in with my instinct, my initial instinct with the character that got me to where I got to for the audition. Because I mean, in terms of like talking specifically about one of my biggest role recently, which was being Jeevan in Station 11, that I auditioned for that. So it was a case of, reading the pilot, which they were kind enough to send to me. And then it was all sort of on instinct, really, at that point. I could sort of largely go off instinct. I prefer to anyway. And then having then auditioned and then been offered the role, it's sort of checking in and going, okay, what was that? Because now you really need to make a note of what it was that you recognized in the character, and then marrying that with conversations you've since had with the filmmakers and in this case the showrunner. And then the third part of which is then I like to just read the script as much as I can. I suppose with Station 11, we shot episode 1 at the beginning of 2020, and then the rest of it was coming down the line. Obviously, it then came down way further down the line because of the COVID pandemic, but either way, I could separate it off. So in a way, I could see it as a sort of a thing unto itself. And so I just read that episode over and over, and often in scripts, it's about what other people say about your character, as well as the behavior that your character displays that will actually tell you who they are. And so that is a really key part of it as well for me, as I start to sort of build this idea of a person.
Are you an actor who likes to see what this person is going to be wearing? Are you an outside in guy?
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, what I've learned on my journey is that, and perhaps I'd have more license to do this as things develop, but it's something that is very important to me. Getting into costume that first time is really important. The physicality is very important to me, and so what someone's wearing is obviously gonna inform their physicality, and so that is really important. And I think what I've learned is that I think I want to start those conversations earlier if I can. You know, it's not always possible. It's not always easy to do that, but it's nice to sort of start that collaborative relationship with the costume designers as early as possible, because, you know, on one hand, I may have ideas of my own. On the other hand, I'm also keen to sort of not overstep the mark there, because a costume designer is a costume designer for a reason. They know what they're doing, and they've certainly thought it through. So, but that collaborative, that sort of collaborative relationship is very important to me. Yeah.
And I just thought of this. Like, one of the first things we see of your character in Station 11 is him in like one of these moments in life that is rare, which is like a crisis, or what would you call it? Like a make or break moment, a fight or flight moment. Is that what this is? But it's early. We kind of know him through what he does in that moment. And I'm wondering if that was like a great benefit for you to read that and see, okay, this is how he responds in this situation. So this is really letting me in a lot to who this person is.
Yeah, I mean, it was huge. I mean, what initially feels like the sort of most random and crazy action to begin a story, though it is obviously also a very thrilling beginning to a story, is actually, the epitome of him, really.
Right.
What I learned about him in that regard is that he's an instinctive person.
Right.
He's all about that, and I think he's all about he doesn't necessarily think things through to their full extent.
Right.
He jumps up on a stage because he recognizes that the guy's having a heart attack, and so he just goes, right, I'm going to climb over these seats, I'm going to climb up there, and then he realizes he has no idea how to do CPR. He doesn't,
Yeah.
So that's the point at which the train comes off the tracks, and that idea is then reinforced by what his sister says later down the line of, I've got two brothers, one of them won a Pulitzer and the other one eats cereal for dinner. Guess which one I just got in touch with? And there was a question there for me, which was, you did do that. Why did you do that? Why not call the guy who's quote unquote more sensible? And it's because she knows that Jeevan's got instinct. And right now, that's what we need. We need someone who's just going to do stuff without thinking about it too much.
Right.
And that actually is probably what helps him survive, what helps Kirsten survive early on.
Yeah.
But ultimately is also something he hasn't really thought about the end point of, really, in a way that I guess you can't when you're in a situation like that. But there does come a point where eventually he does something again out of instinct that ends up tearing him away from her. And so it was all about the consequences of his instinct for me.
Yeah. Here's a weird analogy or metaphor that might not work for you. If not, we can change it. I'm known for my odd metaphors. I'm also known for thinking I'm known for things. If we were going to think of your 10 years on EastEnders as a foundation in a house, and you kind of built upon that foundation all of your other acting work, and that's the house, and this foundation keeps supporting you. Again, this is where it kind of falls apart. The analogy, it had to be doing something to strengthen you that you're still using, I think, because of how long it was and how often you were working. And I would love you to just talk to me about like what the DNA of that foundation is.
It's a very good analogy and a very good question. Hard work is definitely a key part of that DNA. I think you can't not work hard on a show where you have up to 20 scenes a day to do, and the 20 scenes to do very quickly, naturally. And you can do them very quickly because you've got 3 or 4 cameras hoovering it all up. So, you've got maximum probably 2 setups in any scene. It's not really very long at all. So you have to work at a pace. And so that's the basis of the way you simply have to work. It's sort of that's the basis of the form. And then I was very lucky that I got to work with closely with a lot of actors who were about the work. There wasn't just a job that was paying the bills. It wasn't just a job that was a stepping stone. It wasn't being seen in that way. It was being seen as work that we want to do to the best of our abilities. And for me, as a young boy. I was 16 years old when I started. I was 25 when I left. Uh, I was soaking in all of it, and it was an opportunity to learn. Because when I got the job, my parents were very wise, and they said, don't assume this is it.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't made it. Like my first contract was 6 months. It wasn't like I was signed up for years, and I was only ever signed up for 1 year at a time eventually. So I never signed a long-term contract. You were always aware on a show like that you're, I guess, dispensable to some degree. Nothing's bigger than the show. And so it's all about taking in what you can at any moment and doing that to the best of your ability and learning as much as you can. And I was lucky that on that journey, I was working with actors who were so generous to me, and be that directly generous in helping me along and teaching me things, or simply by just being great examples of actors, and so I learned how to get the best out of a scene very quickly, and how to in a way, I guess, read the rhythm of a scene, and you get an idea of storytelling, and you're placed within the telling of that story, I suppose. And I guess ultimately that led me to decide that I wanted to make sure that I was playing a character, because what happened when I was 16 was that I joined that show, I was playing myself. I was 16. I auditioned for this character. I knew who the guy was immediately because he was a nerdy 16-year-old brown kid. And I just so happened to be a nerdy 16-year-old brown kid. And so, I had to play that role. And initially, you're just sort of playing yourself to some degree. I mean, there was always an idea of character in my head, but especially with the costume. The costume was a huge thing for me there. There was this whole thing with him doing his top button up. He'd always have his top button done up. And that was a really important thing for me. Glasses, but I wore glasses at the time. And, there was an element of that gave me a distinction. But then as I grew into my adulthood, it was a fork in the road, and the character went off one way and I went off another way. And, I was playing a character was really important to me.
That's interesting. That's interesting when you're playing so long that you grow out of it, but you still have to keep playing it in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like you're playing an older version of yourself. I mean, a younger version of yourself.
Completely.
You have a story that puts to shame any actor that thinks to themselves, I don't want to be in a short film because it's not going to get me seen. A whole other part of your career began from this short film, right? That 2 doses. I just saw it on Vimeo.
Yeah.
I loved it. I mean, so Danny Boyle was on a jury of this film festival and saw that film, right?
Yeah. So it was this film festival in East London. And I believe one of Danny's daughters was involved in organizing it, and so he was on the jury for it. Him and this actor called Riz Ahmed. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Sure.
But he was on the panel as well, and some other people who, to my shame, I don't know. I wasn't there. I never. My friend, the director, sent me a picture of it. And said, by the way, these guys just gave us an award. And this was in 2015, I think, because the film came out. We shot it in 2014. And they were kind enough to give it an award at that festival. And so it's my thinking. I don't know if I've ever really confirmed this, but it's my thinking that that's why I was on sort of Danny's team's radar.
Right.
To some degree. I think, there's also my agent. I don't want to take anything away from her, but I think they were probably they may have thought of me because of this short film, and also doing that short film. I was still in EastEnders at the time. It was the first thing that I'd done outside of EastEnders.
Wow.
In 7 years.
Right.
So it was the first time that I'd done something cinematic. So it was a real thrill. I learned a lot.
What's the story behind you playing a pigeon and it changing your life?
Yeah, so I left EastEnders in 2016, in March of 2016, and I then very fortunately went almost straight into shooting this comedy for Channel 4 called Damned, which is a show I love. I'm very proud of it. I'm not sure where it's available in the US. You might be able to find it, but check it out if you can. I'm very proud of it. And then I had, nothing in the diary, and I was in that, I'd taken a leap of faith choosing to leave EastEnders, but I knew it was the right time. And I'd had this wonderful bit of fortune. I'd done this job straight away, but then the summer was looking pretty clear. And one of my best friends, he is a musician but also him and his now wife had a theatre company that they'd set up, and it was a bunch of friends. Basically, they'd done a few plays at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where they would take a classic text or a music or some sort of well-known property and create a new musical, a new story. So they'd done a version of Swan Lake, for example, that they rewrote and called it The Duck Pond, and it was this wonderfully sort of quirky, beautiful musical that I saw it at the Edinburgh Fringe a couple of years before. They were doing a new version of Hunchback of Notre Dame, and this friend of mine, he's one of my best friends. He knew that I wanted to do some theatre. I was really keen to do it. I hadn't been on a stage before I was 16, since I got EastEnders, and I wanted to sort of scare myself. I wanted to put myself out of my comfort zone. And he said, "Do you want to come along with us and join the company? We're going to go to Edinburgh. You're more than welcome." I was like, "Yeah, great. Who can I play?" He said, "Well, I can offer you the role of a pigeon, and I can offer you the role of one of the bells of Notre Dame Cathedral." And I was like, "Yeah, fuck it, why not?" So I went along, and I had the best month of my life. I mean, it was just, I was just saying to one of my friends earlier today, I think during the month of August, I don't know if there's anywhere better in the world than Edinburgh. It's just such a wonderful hub of creativity of all kinds. Dance, theatre, comedy, music, it's all there, and people are just having the best time. And I had the best time, and in a lot of ways it changed my life. And so that was when I played a pigeon.
And it must have fed you, right? I mean, it must continue to feed you.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I remember the feeling. We did a preview in London. So we'd been rehearsing up in Lancashire, in this barn, and then we had a preview show at Wilton's Music Hall in London, and we drove down that morning, and we hadn't, the way the chaos of doing a little theatre show is, we were rehearsing, we hadn't done a run through. And we were going to get to Wilton's at a decent time and do a run through. And then we got there, and it was just trying to put the set up, get it out of the van. Took too long. It got to the time of doing this preview show, and we hadn't done a run through. And I remember that feeling of the lights going down, the audience filtering in, and the fear and adrenaline coursing through my body as the lights went down. But you don't have a choice. It's you were saying fight or flight. It was, well, you got to fight. And I loved that feeling, the exhilaration of actually going out there and then doing that. And everyone knowing we're sort of hanging on by our fingertips a little bit here. The trust you have to put in each other, and it brings you closer. And then we just had one hell of a month in Edinburgh, and it was the best.
So since then, you've been in a few really huge productions. What is the actor experience like on a film where a really, truly respected director is at the wheel of the ship? How does that change the day-to-day experience of the actor? We're talking about Tenet, Don't Look Up, even Yesterday. These are people that are left alone to do the film. You know what I mean? I'm talking about the directors. I wanted to know what it's like for the actor on sets like that.
I mean, I've been very lucky that I feel that those three names that you've mentioned, being Christopher Nolan, Adam McKay, Danny Boyle. They've all been very generous with me as an actor. Danny, especially, I think, because it was my first feature film, and he wanted me for that role. He fought for me to get the role, and so he knew that I needed the time to build into it. I needed the time simply to learn the songs and go on that journey. But also, I think, I don't know how aware he was of this, but it was really being part of the journey from early on is something I find thrilling. I love the other side of the camera. Maybe one day I'll do stuff on the other side of the camera, but I certainly enjoy seeing something being built. And so for me, I love the fact that we built this room in the production offices here in London, made it look like my character's bedroom with like music posters, and there was a piano in there and the guitars. And so there was a bed. I never slept in it. But, I got to spend 3 months basically in that room learning all the songs. And then I would, for a break, I'd pop up to the office upstairs and see how they were all getting on with pre-production, and I really enjoyed that. And it was really wonderful and generous of the production and of Danny to insist upon it, that I then just felt like I was at home when we, started rolling.
Right.
I wasn't as nervous as I probably would have been otherwise.
Right.
Yeah, but then at the same time, I never felt like patronized by him, by Richard Curtis, by Lily. None of them I never felt like they felt the need to hold my hand, and that I was really helpful. Again, whether they were doing that consciously or not, either way, it's a good thing. And it made me feel a little bit that I belonged, that it was, that there was a reason I was there. And I have imposter syndrome, I still do, and often I find it crippling, but I suppose in that movie I could channel the imposter syndrome into the character, because the whole movie's about imposter syndrome. And then, when it came to the other two movies there, I didn't expect much because I was a small cog in a huge machine, relatively speaking. But both of those experiences, I was made to feel incredibly important and incredibly, and everyone was incredibly generous. With Chris, I had some ideas about the character. I was very nervous, sort of going in and going, hey, hey, Christopher Nolan, yeah, I like some of this stuff, but some of this stuff, and he was really generous. Between him and his wife Emma, who's his producer, and they were both, in the midst of filming this huge thing, found the time to have this conversation with me, and was, incredibly generous. And then with Adam, we were shooting that in the depths of COVID, end of 2020, beginning of 21. I was in quarantine for 8 days in a hotel, but, I had a phone call with Adam. I had a phone call with Jennifer Lawrence, I was still very nervous going to work that day. But for various reasons, it was the first thing I was doing after COVID, during COVID. And I was working with Adam McKay, I was working with Jennifer Lawrence, I was working with Leonardo DiCaprio. There was a lot going on in my head that day, but those small kindnesses were really important. And I say I'm lucky. I hope I'm not lucky. I hope that's just the way things go.
Right.
But perhaps I am. But it certainly reminds me of how I like to work.
I love Station 11. It feels like there was something cohesive going on, and it's really well directed. But there was different directors that you had to work with here. Is that something that you can, I don't know if you could tell me, no, actually, no, they weren't good. So you can't tell me no.
They were all just terrible. No, it all begins with Hiro Murai, who directed our pilot episode and episode 3, and we shot those simultaneously in the beginning of 2020. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with his work in Atlanta and Barry and his videos with Childish Gambino. And so I was just, so excited to work with him. And he set the tone, between him, just sort of tonally, really crafting what the show was between those 2 episodes. And, Christian, his DOP, really sort of molding the visual language of it all. They lay the foundations, and who knew how important those foundations would be at the time. But the fact that between them and Patrick and, the work that we did, and, myself and Matilda Lawler, who was the young Kirsten, and Danielle Deadweiler, who's Miranda in episode 3, the work that we all did those 2.5 months at the top of 2020, it became the reason that we have a show at all, because I think basically the network looked at that in the midst of the pandemic and said, I think we're going to have to let them carry on with this show, basically, because it was of such quality in their eyes. But then, of course, it's a tough baton to sort of pick up and run with.
Right.
When, it became clear that we weren't going to get Hiro back because he had to go off and do Atlanta. Right. We knew that Jeremy Podeswa was coming on board. I'd met with Jeremy when we were in Chicago, and I got on with him very well, so I knew that he was going to be part of it. But I don't know really at what point our other 2 directors came on board, Helen Shaber, who I sadly didn't get to work with, and Lucy Cheniak. But Lucy was the first one I worked with on episode 7, which is the episode that's set inside the apartment. It sort of answers the question of what happens in those 80 days. And, we met once or twice on Zoom, and then we dived into this crazy episode. And she was just so brilliant to work with. She was so emotionally intelligent, whilst also being very clear about what she was doing with the camera. It seemed to me that she had a very good relationship with her DOP, and I can't imagine how nerve-wracking that must have been for her, that she was sort of going, being given the keys to this thing many months after, everything fell apart to some degree, and being entrusted with setting us back off again. But she was brilliant. We all felt very well carried. It felt collaborative. It was a scary time to go back to work. It was a weird thing to do. Everyone was wearing masks and visors. And, I was only lucky that I knew a couple of the people because they were in Chicago. Otherwise, the whole crew were new to me. And because we'd moved to Toronto. So it was,
I heard you guys talking about this. Like, I couldn't believe it. Like, you didn't even know what people look like. Like you had this special thing on Fridays where you would have like remove your mask day, where people would show
Fridays. That was a thing. Yeah,
that's insane. I think that's like a futuristic apocalypse.
Yeah. We didn't have to go far, but it was it was wonderful, and Lucy did such a great job. And then I was working with Jeremy, and he does a lot of great work for HBO and other networks, but he's done a lot of Game of Thrones, and I think he's done Boardwalk Empire as well. He's a safe pair of hands. He gets stuff done, and he also was there in terms of building Jeevan's story again, and sort of discussing that, and we had a lot of intense sequences to shoot, and that birth sequence especially was a real triumph, I think, on his part. Him and Steve Cousins, our DOP on that episode, who I think did a wonderful job as well.
You said that you knew that you were going to learn about yourself as an actor from taking this character on. What did you mean by that? How did you know that? What did you mean by that? Why is that important?
Sort of going back to that fight or flight thing and that feeling of adrenaline that I had before. I'd done Yesterday, it was the lead role, and then I'd done some supporting roles. And then this lead role had come up my way. And I knew from conversations I'd had with Patrick and Hero that they had more planned for him than was in the book, and more beyond this pilot. And so I knew that, okay, we're going to be going on a journey. So inevitably there'll be something I learn, but I couldn't have imagined just how much I'd learn, and that became clear to me as then I started having conversations with Patrick over the lockdown about where things were going, how things were developing, and the challenges that he was going to set for me, And I really owe Patrick a lot in that he believed in me, and perhaps still does believe in me more than I believe in myself. He recognized something in me, and he trusted me with telling the story in this way, pushed me to places that I hadn't been before as an actor. And, I'm definitely a better actor now than I was when I started the job.
I hope you'll come back on this show. I would really like that. We need a part 2 of this. Himesh Patel, thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.